All right.
Nice.
Well, hello, everyone. This is Tripp, and back for our final live Q&A of the Jesus of Galilee class is John Dominic Crossan. And, oh, man, this is going to be a fun one, Dom. It's going to be a fun one.
Right. And Falchero to everyone. That's in honor of Padraig Mór, Ospel Mór na Héireann, in honor of St. Patrick.
Yes, well, so for those of you that might be just joining live, a lot of these questions were inspired by Dom's lectures, which you can get the current series over at crossanclass.com. But we've done a number of different classes together, and quite a few of you have been in multiple. And so we got questions today, Dom, that start to connect what we've been discussing. The way Jesus' message found traction in Galilee to some of the other classes on, say, the Passion Week and Jesus worked there, to the resurrection in the early church, to Paul and his transformation. I'm pretty excited.
We did Christmas. We've done actually, Tripp, an entire complete course on the historical Jesus.
So, you know, that there's a whole lot of me asking you questions about Jesus, Tom. So now we're gonna have some questions today. Those of you in the chat, you can also insert more questions, but we've got a bunch of them. For those of you that sent long ones, I attempted to make them fit where they show up on the screen, and occasionally signal towards a paragraph about stuff Dom has said elsewhere. So Dom, you feel free to give any background information that shows up in the question that might help. But we'll jump into it because we got plenty of them. And first up, it's from Carol. You say Jesus underwent a conversion away from John's apocalyptic intervention towards a participatory eschatology where God waits for us. Where do you find that waiting God most clearly in the tradition?
All right, Carolyn, thank you. I wouldn't say I find it in the tradition. I find it is the tradition. I'm not just being picky with words. It really is the tradition. Think of covenant. The word covenant, it's berit, in Hebrew, and it was in the entire Middle East. It was a way of making an agreement. Now, usually it's not between two equal great empires, but we have one between the Hittites and the Egyptians. It's usually between an imperial overlord and a vassal state, but it is a two-way street. At least the overlord is expected to give protection. And if you want to say, well, that's just a protection racket, then maybe civilization itself is a protection racket. But fidelity from the vassal, protection from the Lord. It's always a two-way street. It would make no sense in the law, in the prophets, in the wisdom, and if you're waiting for God to do it for it's just not there. So when it arrives, and you can date it almost to the 160s, it arrives under desperation. The people have almost said, we give up. Look, we've been tracking these empires, and along came the Persians. We thought we had finally improved situation. Then we got the Greeks. And if they weren't bad enough, we got the Romans. We give up. God, take over. I mean, I'm afraid it is. I understand it. I really do. It's a loss of nerve, but it's also a loss of faith. We just give up. So I'm going to call it the apocalyptic delusion because I think that's what it is. Thank you, Carol.
All right. Joel's up next. He asks, Jesus spoke constantly of the kingdom of God. We talked a bit about that the last 2 weeks. Paul rarely used the term, preferring salvation, justification, the body of Christ. Is Paul's language the urban equivalent of Jesus' agrarian kingdom?
I don't think so, Joel. It's the Roman equivalent of Jesus's Jewish language. It is, yes, it is for an urban situation, but all anthropologists will tell you that Rome was an agrarian kingdom. In fact, I don't know. I think we still are trying to run an agrarian kingdom. We do depend on the farmers. If they all quit and nothing is grown anywhere in the world, I don't think the cities will last very long. They really won't. So these are different languages for the same thing. And just because in the New Testament, Jesus comes first, and he doesn't come first, of course, in the order of the books, really, but he's first in there. He uses the kingdom of God. So everything has to go along against his kingdom of God, which simply means, in any case, the rule of God. What does the rule of God look like if God was actually running the world right down here? What would it look like? How would rule be administered by the God of the Bible? And if you read the Bible, you know quite clearly how God administers rule. It's called the Torah, the law. Thank you, Joel.
Yeah. There's a few questions here connecting the whole Jesus thing. And if people haven't, the Homebrewed community has site theologyclass.com where you can check out some of the previous classes, like one on Paul the Pharisee. And Claire, who was in that one and this one, asks, Paul's justification refers to God's distributive justice, not retributive. Is Paul's theology of justification by grace Jesus' kingdom program expressed in the language of a Pharisee? Like, how do you connect their two visions?
Thank you, Claire. And that's a little bit like the last question. It's much more that his language, it is, of course, a Pharisee from Paul, but the language is really Roman language. It's what they would understand. Lord, of course, they'd understand that in the Bible as well. But Son of God, Lord, Savior of the world, these are the attributes of Caesar. So it's really geared especially to make it clear to them. Now, you're quite right, by the way. And even logically, I'd like to stress this. You couldn't have retributive justice unless it was based on distributive justice. How could you administer punishments fairly without distributive justice? You're distributing. So the logical basis of justice without any qualifications is distributive justice, a fair distribution of whatever we're talking about. If we happen to be talking about punishment, then so whenever you hear justice in the Bible or somebody crying out, give us justice, they're not saying, please God, punish us. They're not nuts. They're saying, let there be a fair distribution of the world's stuff, which belongs to all of us. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. Nathaniel had a very articulate, large email. This is me attempting to connect, to put it short. He talked about Jesus aiming at the dispossessed Galilean peasants. We've talked about that in this class in the Move. And in when you talked about in the Paul class that Paul bypassed the countryside and targeted the urban God-fearers, a particular group to find kind of initial traction. And so he's wondering how you connect the kind of the way Jesus found traction in his movement to Paul, and how that kingdom vision becomes intelligible to people that don't have the whole inheritance of the Jewish tradition.
Okay. And well, first of all, I would say, Nathaniel, Paul is focusing very much on God-fearers or God worshippers. That is Gentiles, pagans, if you want to put it that way. So the males would not be circumcised, but they're sympathetic to the Jewish God, Jewish morality, and probably attend the synagogue. So yes, of course, if you bother to attend the synagogue, you might even know more about Judaism than some of the Jews in there who take it for granted. Like if somebody went today to live in Ireland, they might end up knowing more about Irish history than somebody who lived there. So yes, dispossessed penance, but the huge Roman Empire had a, shall I say, a dispossessed group called the slaves. Now, please forget about Southern slavery. It doesn't help us to understand Roman slavery. If the Romans went over there, and of course they did, over to the east, for example, and brought back thousands of slaves, a lot of them were far more educated, could read and write probably, and think better than the Romans who possessed them. That's why the Romans used them to run their businesses. So that's the group Paul is going to especially to keep an eye on. The freed slaves, especially, where do I belong? A Roman brought me from, I don't know, Cappadocia or wherever, brought me here. Okay, I'm very grateful to my master or mistress who freed me. I'm very loyal to them. But why do I care about the Roman Empire? Zilch. My loyalty is to this family who freed me. Now, along comes Paul with a vision, a counter vision to the Roman Empire. Okay, Paul, we're listening. We're not convinced yet, but we're listening. We understand what you're talking about. We're listening. That's what makes Paul tick. Thank you, Natalia.
Yeah. All right. Sonia asked, Jesus converted away from apocalypticism. Paul still expected a swift consummation in his own lifetime. Did Paul regress into the delusion Jesus had abandoned or get the timeline wrong?
Yeah, I think it was so common to think that God's coming to do it soon. I think the soon stayed even when God's now participatory. But soon something's going to happen. I don't think you could get away from it. It's controversial in scholarship. Did Jesus expect it to be over soon? I won't even bother arguing. If he did, he was wrong. Get over it. If Paul certainly thought it was going to be over soon, wrong. Mark thought it, wrong. I think Q thought it. Anyone, the drag of normalcy. Imagine somebody listening to Jesus or Paul saying, okay, now I should participate with God, but that'll be over soon, right? So the drag of soon has pulled Christianity for 2,000 years and stopped us doing what we're supposed to be doing, and is still doing it. I would think after 2,000 years, when soon has been wrong, it is time to give an honorable burial to soon and may it rest in peace.
Yeah. All right. Mark asks, Jesus kept moving to avoid becoming a stationary broker of God's power. We talked in here about not just him moving to Galilee, but like not setting up, right, like a place for people to come to be healed. How did Paul ensure his localized urban assemblies didn't revert to exactly the hierarchical patronage Jesus was dismantling?
Oh, it's fascinating, Mark. You can read it in the Corinthians, especially First Corinthians. You can see the Corinthians dragging everything, including the Eucharist, for example, back into Roman normalcy. Okay, yeah, fine, we got it. Now let's have a dinner in the Roman style. So we all come together. Oh yeah, Paul, we'd all come together like you said, but we bring our own food. Now that sounds like a nice potluck. Oh yeah, but somebody's bringing very good wine and somebody's bringing the awful stuff. And those were kind of common in Roman feasts. If the master of a big house held a feast on some festival, and all his servants even come in, and his freed slaves come in, which was, I don't say common, but happened. he would show them discrimination by giving the best stuff to his amici, his friends at the top table, and you guys all the way down to we get the tuna and you get the sardines if you're lucky. So that's the normalcy of a Roman feast. If you have just your amici there, of course, everything should be equal. But there's big discussions about it. You can watch First Corinthians, what the Corinthians are doing, and they're not rich people, but it could be freed slaves who have their own small business. So they're better than the street poor, at least. And they just want it back to normalcy. Couldn't we just kind of bring in the better wine for us? And Paul insists, no, we can only eat between the breaking of the bread and the passing of the cup. Passing of the cup, one cup. Breaking bread, one bread. Those are hugely symbolic of unity and participation.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. All right. Andrew asked, you said that parables are deliberate provocations designed to lure listeners into arguments about it. How do communities trained on moral example stories retrain themselves to sit with a question that has no clean answer?
There are whole books written actually on how to train people to think, which is something we desperately need, because right now we have not just the word, we have the image, and pretty soon we'll have we already have the false word, but pretty soon we'll have the word already false. I keep going to say false as it arrives. Already we have the word false as it arrives. But I'm trying to imagine what AI will do to words and images. And we have to train ourselves to think, to have a position. So no, I don't know where that came from, but I don't think it's true. You're showing me a picture of it happening. I no longer believe it because it cannot be. So we have to train ourselves that moral example stories are example stories, which we're getting all the time. So if somebody shows me a picture of somebody doing something evil, even now, right now, 2026, I have to question, can I trust that image? And that's why, at least in these images that I'm giving you, there ain't no AI in any of my images. Okay. Thank you, Andrew.
All right. James said, you call it the Aesopic fallacy, reading as literal history what was meant as parable. How do we tell the difference, and what do we lose when we insist on the videotape version?
Okay, I was joking with the Aesopic fallacy. I imagine if a whole group of people said, we are devotees of Aesop, he is our God, and in the days of Aesop, the animals could speak because he didn't eat them, say. So they could speak. See, read Aesop. I'm sorry, I would say that's little. I'm hauled into court by the Society of Aesop devotees. We don't do that. We understand what Aesop is doing. And if a little mouse befools a great big bear, the ex-slave Aesop is having it at the aristocracy. But what you have to do, you really have to know the matrix. That's how I do. I have read all the Roman stuff, and it's a world of marvels. Everyone believes marvels there. Now, I mightn't believe your marvel, first century, but I believe my own. I'll buy the whole story of the founding of Rome, filled with marvels, lovely stuff. Poetry, says Livy, when he has to write it under Augustus and he doesn't want to say, I don't think it really happened. Lovely poetry. Read the Roman stuff. Read Josephus. Then when you read the Christian stuff, you won't say, oh, I didn't know that at that time this could happen. But if everyone is claiming it, then why do you privilege the miracles of Christianity and not the marvels of Roman imperialism? Either all of it, I'm not going to say all of it is parable, of course it's not, but any account of Rome you're reading. When you read Tacitus, he doesn't like the empire. He likes the republic. I put question marks over an awful lot of Tacitus. It's very well written, beautiful Latin, flowing like mad. And a lot of it, when he's after the empire, when he tells you that Nero kicked his wife to death, I don't know about that. So you learn to be critical. That's all. You could be wrong. Critical, skeptical, and critical, as you should be about anything.
Yeah. Jason had a similar question. The Enlightenment equated truth with factuality, and then biblical literalism followed. How does the church recover Scripture's authority as parabolic narratives without, true, without needing that video camera factuality type of orientation?
Okay, continuing from the last one, Jason. When I was writing God and Empire, I took seven Roman versions of something we all know about Caesar, Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon. Okay, we all know it. It's a proverb and all the rest of it. Took 7 different stories. Now, Caesar himself tells us the story and doesn't even bother mentioning he crossed the Rubicon. He just says he went from one place to the other. Unless he flew, he had to cross the Rubicon. He didn't think it was important, but you learn by comparative reading. Okay, somebody's on the far side telling him, come on, Julius Caesar. Somebody's on the far side, another story saying, stay. Okay, one's against him, one's for him. You learn critical reading. I don't know, honestly, how to do it unless you're doing it when you read your newspaper, if you still have a newspaper, or listening to the news. If you're not into critical thinking, then, I mean, that's a kind of redundancy, by the way. There's no other type of thinking besides critical thinking, except parroting or something like that. So they have to. That's a good example. When I was beginning with this way back with Roman Catholics right after the Second Vatican Council, this would be in the 60s, I used to begin by giving them in parallel columns. I typed it all out nice and neat. 3 versions of the conversion of Paul in Luke, Acts of the Apostles. 3 different versions. Now, he knew you were going to go from chapter 9 to 22 to 26. So what's he up to? I would simply give it to them. These are 3 versions. Why aren't they all the same? Or why doesn't he say in the second one, as I said in the first and the third? Think with me. I did the same with kids at, I couldn't say kids, students at DePaul University. I give them parallel text stuff. I'd ask them to read, what am I doing? Read horizontally, don't read vertically. When I had them read vertically, by the time they got into the middle of Matthew, there was a revolt. This is the same stuff over and over again. It's all these miracles, all these parables. So I went horizontal. It's the best way to teach people. Give them something in the Bible, 2 verses. You can get the story of Manasseh and Josiah as it's told in Kings and as it's told in Chronicles when they're cleaning up after the exile. And story about David, horrible things he does. Check another version. It's all in the Bible if you actually read it. Thank you, Jason.
Mm-hmm. All right. Ryan asks, John fasted, Jesus feasted, Lent fast, Easter feast. Is the whole liturgical calendar quietly encoding the debate between apocalyptic waiting and collaborative celebration?
Oh, that's right. It's still there. Thank you, Ryan. I spent 19 years in a monastery, and those are terribly real for us. We really fasted during Lent. Oh, yeah, we did. In the monastery, especially in Italy, when you had a feast in Italy, you had a feast. We had 2 or 3 different types of wine, white wine, red wine, and afterwards a liqueur. Yeah, you had a feast. It wasn't overdone. It really wasn't, but it was certainly different from the ordinary day. So there was a time when the liturgical year was the year, and it's set how everything works. So yes, you are terribly aware of something like, why are we fasting? Why do we fast? Well, are we fasting for God to do something for us? Well, then why don't we do that all the time? So yeah, if you're thinking, I know the French talk about deconstruction. Forget deconstruction. Thinking will take care of it. Just think. Ask questions. Why do we do this? Any 7-year-old will ask questions, and then finally you squish them. Just believe, and they give up. So ask questions. And the only way you can answer questions is by doing historical background. Otherwise, you just go into, well, I don't know why Jesus did it. Let's get into Jesus' psychology, which we can't do, of course. But if you know the background, the matrix, everything that's going on, you can answer questions. Okay. Thank you, Ryan.
Mm-hmm. All right. David asks, Mark frames Lent as a journey from Caesarea Philippi to Jerusalem, a deliberate path of confrontation. What are the disciples being prepared for, and does the geography itself carry the theology?
Thank you, David. Yes, Mark is highly critical, as you know, of the 12. And it starts really, well, it started before that, actually, as we saw the last time with the parables. But by chapter 6 and 7, they're really not ready to accept that Jesus is going up there to die. And of course, as Mark gives it, it's quite plausible to say, well, he's going up there to get himself killed. Mark is writing, of course, after the event and making the statement that Jesus was willing. But he's going up there because I think, as I said, he's invited up there to take his movement to there. But Peter won't accept it. Get behind me, Satan. Hey, that's pretty awful, to be called Satan in the Bible is pretty bad. So the whole time going up there is supposed to be like a final desperate education for Mark. Could he finally get them to accept crucifixion? He says it 3 times in Mark. Did nobody say to him, what on earth are you talking about? You're going up to get crucified? Are you nuts? And then you're going to be resurrected? Or couldn't you just skip the whole operation, stay in Galilee, and celebrate Easter without getting killed? So Mark writes backwards, as it were, and he's asking you to accept the backwards, but the backwards is terribly critical. He tells them to take up your cross. Now, he's not really inviting them, get yourself crucified, but he's saying this is dangerous business. And to their honor, they stick with him. To be fair, they may not know where they're going or what they're doing, but they're with him. And in many cases, we have to be very grateful for people who are with us, whatever the reason. Thank you, David.
Yeah. All right. Sarah, in the email, talked about some of the stuff you talked about Palm Sunday before made more sense. She thinks the traction stuff is sticking in this series of lectures. So she asks, in that lecture, you talked about Palm Sunday having 2 different processions: Pilate's military parade from the west and Jesus' donkey from the east. Did the crowds know what they were watching, and was the contrast intentional? And did it have the kind of traction that so many of the kind of parables we talked about did the moment we start locating it after Jesus' move away from John and to the shore?
And I think, Sarah, the answer is yes. Now, we pushed it a little bit, Marcus Borg and I, when we had the 2 processions happening at the same time. I don't know they happened at the same time, but one was from the west for sure, one was from the east, and they keep coming from the east. When you do a movement, timing is very important. Timing is important. I think Jesus knows exactly what he's doing, and it's a setup. Go get the donkey. Oh, so this is a setup. Go get the donkey. Now, look at that. Riding in on the donkey. Okay, on the one hand, it reminds you of David, which is good, but a man riding on a donkey, it's a little bit embarrassing. Is he side saddle or a cross? And in the picture, which is sort of a mistranslation, where the donkey is a female donkey with her little coat running along at the side, which is probably a confusion of poetic parallelism. But in any case, a man riding a female donkey with a colt at her side, which is the image Marcus and I put originally on the front of our last week. That's really absurd. I mean, maybe a mule you might get away with, you can't buy a horse, but a female donkey, a nursing female donkey, that's a caricature. That's Saturday Night Live at the gates of Jerusalem. So yeah, I don't think they can miss it, honestly. I don't think a good demonstration can be missed, or it's a bad demonstration, even if it's brave and courageous, if it doesn't work. So yes, it's a great big parabolic action. Dangerous, of course, but same process. If you don't get it, then if you think I came all the way from Galilee, I'm really tired, I can't make it the last mile. Okay, if that's your interpretation, then you've missed it, I think. Thank you, Sarah.
All right. Lisa asks, you say that Jesus didn't cleanse the temple, he shut it down as a prophetic act. What exactly was he condemning? The commerce, the priesthood's collaboration with Rome, the whole sacrificial system?
Okay, Lisa, and again, it's a parable. Now, if somebody wants to say, well, he just doesn't like priests, okay? Very often, anti-clerical say, oh, good, or he doesn't like temples, or he doesn't like blood sacrifice. You can interpret it that way if you want. Now, there is one thing, though, at least in the story, he quotes, you have made it a den of thieves. Now, that goes wrong very often because we think, well, a den of thieves, they're stealing. Those priests who are, changing the money, they're defrauding people. Forget all that. It's a quotation from Jeremiah 7. And in Jeremiah 7, Jeremiah is told to go up to the temple, stand in front of the doors so people are coming in, and tell them in the name of God. God says, if you go outside this temple and commit injustice, you can read it, it's there, and you think you come in here and say, wow, we're safe. We made it to the temple. He can't get us. God said, I will bring this temple down around your ears. Now, he almost gets killed for that. Read chapter 24, which tells the same story of Jeremiah. They almost put him to death for saying God might destroy the temple. That's pretty bad. But the message is clear. If you use worship as a refuge from justice, distributive justice again, then I will take away your worship by bringing your temple down in ruins. What Jesus does is not cleanse the temple. That's rubbish. He symbolically shuts it down. And if you say he really doesn't, of course he doesn't. He just thoroughly annoys the money changers by turning over their tables, which might convenience, get back to business. And he drives out with the whip of cords the animals, whatever animals he can do. Does he shut it down? Of course not. Any more than if you go into a draft office and pour pig's blood, let's say, over the draft cards during the Vietnam. Would you close down the Pentagon? No, it's a demonstration. But demonstrations, again, I repeat, are dangerous. They're on the cusp between nonviolent resistance as speaking and nonviolent resistance as acting. It's a dangerous cusp of it. Jesus didn't invent it. Pharisees had already done it at the death of Herod, for example. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah. All right. Tom asks, render unto Caesar. You call that a trap. Jesus escaped brilliantly. What was the trap? How did he slip it? What does his answer actually mean beyond the bumper sticker version?
Okay. Well, Tom, the classical, I have a copy I picked up in Jerusalem of the silver denarius. Look, I lose it. If I can hardly hold it, to be honest with you. It's so tiny. I certainly can't read it, the whole Latin inscription around it. So imagine a slightly larger coin, at least maybe closer to our quarter, and saying something like Caesar, God. Nice and simple. Kaiser, Theos, Augustus, something like that. Augustus is God. Now, if you show that to Jesus, Augustus is God, that's the slogan of the Roman Empire, if you want to put it. It's probably Tiberius by that time, but still, Caesar, Augustus, God. He's shown that coin. That equates Caesar and God. If he says, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar, to God the things that are God, he has separated them, and that's high treason. So now, immediately let's debate now and get clear what's Caesar's and what's God. And we play that game for 2,000 years. What Jesus says clearly, Caesar, which is the normalcy of civilization, is not God, which is the normalcy of creation. Caesar is not God. Now, we are really good at trying to argue we put the church over here, the building, and then we put the fundamental thing, keep God and Caesar separate. That's That's what's high treason, first of all. If when the Romans understand that you're kind of serious about this, you're not talking about minor details. How do you know whether the taxes go to Caesar? And if Caesar is God, aren't you paying taxes to God? Yeah, that's exactly what he is doing. He's separating Caesar and God in a world where they are equated. That's what's going on. In other words, it's high treason, simply. Thank you, Tom.
Mm-hmm. All right. Rachel's question is the authority. She was in one of the previous classes where you talk about what happened in the Passion Week and stuff. And she said the authorities needed Judas because the Passover crowd was protecting Jesus. Does that mean the betrayal was less about theology and more about logistics, finding him in the dark?
Well, Rachel, you're right. It was about finding him in the dark. But theology is about the reason for the logistics, if you will. Why did they go finding him in the dark? And as I understand it, in the story, Mark has, of course, Judas betray him because in Mark, 14:1, the authorities have given up. They finally said it's too dangerous. Let them get back to Galilee get out of here. They're not going to make a move. There might be a riot. It's not worth the risk. Riots are far more dangerous than Jews. So let him do his thing. And then in the story, of course, along comes Judas, who is the betrayer, and he is counterpointed, if you read the chapter, counterpointed with that woman, by the way, who anoints Jesus because she says to herself, I believe you. And she's the first person who believes Jesus. And she's not a disciple and she's not a male. But she says, I believe you. If you're going to die and rise, I'll never get a chance to do what I would love to do to anoint your body. So I'm going to do it now. That's why Jesus says, never ever tell this story without her. But she's counterpointed with Judas. That's Mark. I am not really at all certain about Judas. I've gone backwards and forwards over 50 years. He's not necessary because Caiaphas is smart enough. He was in for over 10 years when he was finally dismissed. He's, I think, maybe one of the longest running high priests in the first century. He would figure out Jesus is safe in the temple. We can't touch him with a crowd. And he goes out to Bethany every night. We can't touch him there either. We'll get killed. But there's a point where he's left the temple and hasn't made his move around the north or south of the Mount of Olives. We could get him down in the ravine there. There's a place there called Gethsemane or something. Let's go for him there. We'll catch him in between, in the dark, and get it over when everyone's busy and nobody knows what's going on. And no, the whole world is not watching on the top of a hill. We can get it done and nobody even knows it done until it's over. So I don't need Judas, to be honest with you. I understand why Mark would invent him, though people would say nobody would ever invent one of the 12. Of course they would. Mark's been busy doing a job on Peter, James, and John, and the 12 in general, the whole gospel. Mark is against the 12. Not, I think, anything about them in the year 70 when he's writing, but because of the way they have not left Jerusalem, he would say, and gone, as they were told, back to Galilee. Okay, long answers. Thank you, Rachel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Kevin said, you connect the Last Supper to Jesus's earlier open commensaliity. This is in reference to your big historical Jesus book. What does it mean to read the bread and wine not as atonement, something he talked about being raised, reading it as, but as a mandate for equal distribution of Earth's resources?
Okay, the important thing for me is that in ordinary language, if a person just dies, normally, we talk about the separation of body and soul. And that goes all the way back to Plato and all the rest of it. So it's not new. Now, when somebody dies and you separate body and blood, that's a violent death of some type. Now, you could say it's an accident, but for the moment, let's say it's an execution. So what you're dealing, Kevin, with in the Last Supper, and by the way, I do not think Jesus conducted a Last Supper. What Jesus conducted is the fair distribution of, say, bread and fish, for example. And the language is still the same. He took, blessed, broke, gave. Took, blessed, broke, gave. Those are the rhythmic language. We find them here now. What's going on there? What is going on is the open commensality. That is the fair distribution of the world, at least of food. You know, it's so pathetic. The Old Testament talks about a fair distribution of land. The New Testament has given up on land. You don't mention that, it'll get squashed like a bug. Rome owns the land. Could we just have a fair distribution of food? You haven't even got the education or health, just food at least. So now what it's saying is, if you go for a fair distribution of food, you're going to get killed. Or at least you can get killed. You have a separation of body and blood. So Jesus's commensality cost him not the separation of say, bread and wine, as it were, which is a normal twosome, but the bread and wine symbolizing the separation of body and blood. Body and blood is the cue. Excuse me. Red and wine, body and blood. That's the cue. This is my body. This is my blood. So it's something that didn't happen with fish, but could have happened. If Antipas hadn't killed John, he certainly would have killed Jesus. He's just probably waiting, prorating how often you kill a popular prophet. So the Eucharist, I'm getting this really from Paul, because Paul tries to tell them, this is not an ordinary meal. It's not a nice sharing of bread and wine or whatever else you want to bring along. It is an open statement, a witness before the group that I am willing to die to have my blood and my body separated for the fair distribution of the world. That's like, if I'm not going to use that illustration. That's like an open commitment to what it means to you. Now you're not looking. Paul's not running a crucifixion factory, but he is telling them this is dangerous stuff, and it could lead to this. And you're willing to make a statement. And he warns the Corinthians: don't touch the Eucharist unless you know what you're doing. Just have your meals at home and mind your own business. So it really has to do with the distribution. Advocating it, demanding it is dangerous. Kevin, thank you.
Yeah. All right. So we have a few questions from people coming from more theologically conservative backgrounds, trying to understand what this means, thinking of Easter coming up. Jennifer said, you challenge substitutionary atonement, the idea God required Jesus' death as payment. What does a participatory resurrection offer instead? And does it change what Good Friday means?
Okay, Jennifer, let me even begin with participatory execution. As you read the execution, you'll notice that it's a tissue of resonances from the Psalms of the Suffering One, from all sorts of suffering in the. Jesus doesn't die up there alone. He dies surrounded by the suffering of all his people. That's what that stuff means. No, I don't think, honestly, literally, that down at the foot the soldiers cast lots for his gap. Not that they couldn't, of course they could, but that's missing the whole reference. The reference is to, oh, my God, why is that? I don't think Jesus said that. I don't think you make speeches of any type when you're dying in agony, by the way. I really don't. But everything that it says Jesus said and does is to tell you he does not suffer alone. He's dying in participation with the sufferings of his people. Therefore, of course, if you don't have a individual execution, but a participatory execution, you can't have an individual resurrection. You have to have a participatory resurrection. So when Sarah and I were, and the Borg Crossan pilgrimage, going around Turkey and seeing these images from Eastern of the Easter resurrection, where Jesus takes Adam and Eve with him. He doesn't come out of the sepulchre gorgeous, triumphant, beautiful, all alone, like our Western Easter. But in Eastern Easter, he takes the whole human race with him. Now you can think, and you should think, what on earth does that mean? Jesus came out with the whole human race. That must have been a big crowd. He comes out with Adam and Eve. It's not about individualism again. It's about participation. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to show in the Eastern Orthodoxy, which is much better continuity with the New Testament than we are in the West, that it's a participatory execution and a participatory resurrection. And our job is to figure out, what does that mean in practice? It's not that evident, by the way, but we should at least take the challenge. Thank you, Jennifer.
All right. Michael, similar theme, said Anselm's framework frames God as exacting judge demanding payment. If participatory atonement calls believers to die to imperial normalcy and rise to a new life, what does that actually demand daily?
Good. And, Michael, I've sympathy for Anselm, though in 1066, when the Normans came over to England, and 100 years later to be in Ireland, I know that date 1066 was drummed into us early in the game, he is the second Norman Archbishop of Canterbury. And like all great empires, the Norman Empire boasts, of course, of its justice. After we pacify you savages, there will be justice. Yeah, we've taken your stuff, so there'll be just. So Anselm looking for his model, trying to figure out God by reason alone. That's what he do. And to his credit, he's doing it to avoid the First Crusade, which is going on at the same time. He doesn't think he should kill Muslims or Jews. You should debate with them. And you have to debate from reason, of course. So his cur deus homo, he wonders, why did God become man? Maybe he should have asked cur homo deus. He might have got farther. Why was a man called God? But anyway, that's what he's trying to find out, what God is up to. And the only answer he can come to is, what is the perfect model of a Norman? A just judge. God is the supreme just judge. Now, once you get it to Anselm on that point, you've lost the argument at that point. That's why I won't concede that the primary model for God is a judge. What if God's a father? Again, using a male model, and metaphorically. Fathers usually don't judge their own children. They have to recuse themselves. He was a great spiritual advisor. What if God is like a spiritual advisor trying to make people holy? He ran a monastery. If you really work with vicarious atonement in a monastery, you won't have much monks pretty soon. They're all trying to be holy, but they're... So Anselm blew it in plain language, and he blew it because he was a Norman archbishop, an imperial Norman archbishop, and he thought God had to be a just judge. And his argument is God can't forgive. A judge can't go in and say, I forgive you all because it's a nice day. No. So God has to exact the price. But what if any price is built already into the system? What if when God created the world, there are ways within it in which we do not get away with what we've done? Empires come and go, and we don't have to ask God to do anything about it. So Anselm, I understand him. I've read him. I know I'd lose an argument if I went along with him on that first point, but I won't go along with him at that point. I would say to him, Our Father, who art in heaven, Anselm, not our judge, who art in court. Right, Anselm? Our Father. Now, that's a male model. I know all that stuff. But our Father is not the same as our judge. So let's be very careful. Thank you, Michael, very much.
Mm-hmm. All right. Karen asked, and she's wanting to make sure she's correct here, but it was a longer email. So in the ancient world, sacrifice meant making something sacred to restore a broken relationship, not a punishing substitute. How does that change what Jesus died for our sins actually means?
Okay, thank you very much for that, Karen. Yeah, sacrum facere is the base for sacrifice. It means to make sacred. And it's based on the very common um, Anthropology 101 that if you and I have had a row and I want to make up, I either give you a gift, right? Or I invite you to a meal, which is another type of gift. And when you have a meal in the ancient world, whatever about the modern world, the fatted calf is going to end its life. There will be so what the Bible says without forgiveness, there's no shedding of blood. They're making a common statement. So if you have a problem with God, maybe let's say your country has had a drought, year. God must be mad at us. What gift can we give adequate to stop this drought? And that's the question that you ask. What gift? So you have sacrum facerated. That's what they're doing in the temple at Passover. They're taking the lamb, they're sacrum facering it by giving it to God. Blood is put in the altar. Then God gives you back the meat, and you celebrate a dinner with God. And so you're back. That's the logic of it. That's what's behind the thinking. Now, I don't know how it works if you're a vegetarian, but I'm not being cynical, but the idea is gift and meal. Those are the basis for the human. Now, if is Jesus a sacrifice? Yeah, I can say that. Is his death peculiarly sacred? Yeah. I mean, every death in a way is peculiarly sacred. But if a firefighter rushes into a building to save a kid, up there in the third floor, manages to drop the little baby, say, out the window to the firefighters below, then the whole thing crashes in on top of her. I wouldn't want to say, oh, firefighter killed. I would want to say something like firefighter sacrificed her life. She made it peculiarly sacred by giving it up. Now, she didn't do it deliberately. She didn't want to do it, but she knew it could happen. And maybe if you confronted her with, would you be willing to die to save the kid? She might well say yes. That's what sacrifice does. So Jesus, if you confront them, look, you're going up to Jerusalem. Now, supposing they kill you, will you still go? I think Jesus would say yes. He would say the message is more important. Yes. But that doesn't mean he went up there looking to get killed and everything. And just say, as we saw, meant he's trying to avoid it. So he died for our sins because our sin, I'm going back now, as you well know, to Genesis 4, where I always start the first word of sin. Our sin as a species is escalatory violence. A lot of the other stuff, a little bad thought here, a little bad. It really is embarrassing to try and see what we're avoiding. Let's talk about sex rather than violence. Let's talk about sex, because then we're not talking about violence. But the sin of the human race's sin is escalatory violence, and it may eventually destroy us. And Jesus, yes, died for us, for that sin. And so did many others, by the way.
Yeah. All right. Thomas said, you say celebrating Easter without the political realities of Good Friday is dangerous. What does Easter become when it's separated from the fact that the empire executed Jesus for sedition?
Oh, Thomas, I don't even know what it becomes. I don't know, an excuse to have a good meal. Paul is absolutely clear that execution, resurrection are, use my symbol, two sides of a one coin, and we can't have a one-sided coin. So what we have done by separating Easter into these two parts and then putting the crucifix up there in our church, well, you can say, well, it's empty, but no. I think we're embarrassed by Easter. I'm embarrassed by resurrection. We don't know what to do with it. Crucifixion, we understand. Yeah, you could be up there and watching it. But resurrection? Could anyone see resurrection? The answer is no, of course not. So I think it's sort of takes the core of Christianity and guts it. We can't work with the duality of execution, resurrection. Because for Paul, that's the only place I see it, by the way, in Paul. I see it clearly in Paul because he's thinking about it. He's thinking about, well, if God allowed the Messiah Christ to be executed and knew it was going to happen, what's God's solution to that? God has just revealed to me the savage heart of of civilization. Okay, God, what are you going to do about it? What's the big revelation that compensates for that? Paul's answer is resurrection. So if you separate them, you destroy them both. But I don't want to destroy execution. You know what I mean. You destroy the meaning of execution. Just becomes one more brutal imperial action.
All right. Stephen asked, the risen Christ must always carry unhealed wounds. Why unhealed? What does it mean that the resurrection doesn't erase the marks of imperial execution but preserve them?
Yeah, I think it's very important, Stephen, because it's true. Every time you see mystics in the Middle Ages, Jesus appears to them, the wounds are still there. You think after 1,000 years, they'd have healed. No, I think it's permanent. So when Paul says, so always I'm going back to Paul. When Paul says in Romans that we have died with Christ, now, what does that mean when he's talking to ordinary people who have not died with Christ? I aren't planning, please. If we'd like to get through the day and home to our family. So Christ died by the values of civilization. Christ died by them. Paul is telling them, you must die to them. That's what Paul is saying. Christ died from them. They killed them. If Rome didn't think with the way it thought, they'd have said, Jesus, you got a sense of humor. That's fine. No, but Paul is telling them quite clearly, the values that Rome has, which are the values of civilization, violence-based civilization, they killed Paul. You die to it. Die from it, die to it. That's what he's telling them. So the marks of imperial execution, that's why the stigmata can appear eventually on St. Francis's hands, which is quite possible, I would imagine. But that's the meaning of it. You've died to it. Now, he wasn't crucified. Nobody crucified St. Francis, but you have died too. So the challenge for us is loud and clear. You have died to the values of Roman civilization. And Paul is quite clear what the values are: militarism, sexism, all those isms that you know as well as I do, marching along and drumbeat. You've died to them. Thank you, Stephen.
Mm-hmm. All right. Patrick's in a group that did the Easter stories class with us previously, but he wasn't in it. And so this is where the question came from. You talk about the Western resurrection in art. Jesus rises alone, ascension, and then the Eastern, when you get Adam and Eve coming out, like you had talked about before, pulling them out of the tombs. What does each image assume about what resurrection is actually for?
Well, Patrick, the Western is quite clear. Jesus is coming out. And basically, if you go into the theology, and if you believe in that, the same thing might happen. Okay, I'm sorry. The same thing will happen to you. That's the theology. You believe in this, but there's kind of a disjunction there. Couldn't it just be something else equally absurd? And as long as I believe in it, but the Eastern one is so clear. Adam and Eve, and he's taking them by the limp wrist because they've been asleep a long time. He's taken the human race out of them. Now that forces me to think. I don't have to think much if I'm looking at the Western one. Okay, so some kind of a miracle was performed for Jesus. It looks a little bit different, say, than Caesar or Julius Caesar rising up to heaven spiritually, but it seems to have a body. But okay. If you're going to up among the gods, it's not any harder to say a body goes with you than you go by soul alone. Fine. These are all marvels of the first century. But Adam and Eve? Now, how could you take that literally? Just tell me how to take it literally. I can honestly take the Western one literally. Okay, if I was there, I see Jesus coming out. I may not believe it, but that's what it's saying. I can see it. Now, I cannot know how we could take Adam and Eve with him, because Adam and Eve are not Adam and Eve, two nice people from the Old Testament. They are the human race. And it's kind of a little bit, I don't want to say hilarious, in some medieval images when they want to try and show the whole human race coming out with Jesus, because Jesus wants to show his mother why he's been gone for 3 days and not called home. This is really in medievals. And so he brings the whole human race to tell her what's going on. How is the whole human race saved by what happened to Jesus? And the answer to that is because God says, if you do not avoid, now let me put it positively, if you avoid the escalatory violence, which is your curse, the curse of your race, of your species, let us say, this is the alternative. Heaven on earth, if you want. Okay. Thank you, Patrick.
Mm-hmm. All right. Helen asks, you say Emmaus always happens, whether or not it happened. How do we read Easter stories as parabolic narratives without that becoming a polite way of saying they didn't really occur?
Okay, I know, Helen, we have to do some awful remedial work here, especially among people who don't really read poetry. I hear a lot. I think I hear that people don't like to read poetry. So they're not used to metaphors. And they're not used to a metaphor becoming real. Now, if you cannot see what is happening all around you on the evening news and people are deciding to live a metaphor, it's a metaphor. Let us imagine that I, your president, was defrauded in the last election. Let us imagine that. Therefore, obviously, all of these people are criminals. Let us imagine then that I am now. Don't I have the duty of punishing them? You want to know how to live a metaphor and how metaphors run your lives. I would invite you to watch the evening. Okay, I would invite you to watch Fox News. Can we get serious? Metaphors are what we live by. The examples I give, the easy one was, using extreme cases in the 1930s, Roosevelt and Hitler, different metaphors, the Third Reich or the New Deal. If you live by them, if you don't, they just float across the air like butterflies in the summer. But when you start living them, they become reality. So to say that's metaphorical rather than real is absurd. Metaphorical, literal, real, unreal. And I'm quite aware that I've just demolished most of the Reformation, arguing whether this or that is metaphorical or real. And good, it should be demolished because it's a phony political and polemical distinction. Thank you, Helen.
All right. Linda asks, the Bible contains two gods, the violent retributive God of Deuteronomy and Revelation and the nonviolent distributive God of Genesis. How do we use the historical Jesus to decide which texts carry authority?
Okay, Linda, and I'd even push you back into the Old Testament, forget Jesus for a moment. When the Bible was being put together, as you remember, after the Babylonian exile, after the end of that, and when the Persians took over the world, as it were, in assembling the Bible, they had to put a preface up first. Let's call it a preface. And the function of a preface, and I've done enough of them after I've written the book, write a preface up front to hope people will read the whole book through the preface in case I wasn't clear. The preface is Genesis 1. Genesis 1 is written to change the entire reading of the Bible, including Genesis 2, by the way, to show that in the beginning, God distributed God's own self to a whole world. That's where distribution comes from. God is the great distributor and distributes the power and control of the earth to us. That's where God is established as not commanding, ordering, suggesting, proposing distribution, but being distribution. So that's written up front. So that should be influencing you all the way through, despite lots of desperate attempts to get around it, to be honest with you. It keeps coming through again and again and again, with a Jesus, with a Paul. And you shouldn't be surprised that one last desperate attempt is the book of Revelation. It's all right. You can understand it. Could we get back to Deuteronomy, where God rewards and punishes, and not in this life, in the next life, and everything is fine? I think the historical Jesus, with this whole participatory thing, is reading Genesis back to us once more. So begin with Genesis. Begin with Genesis 1 as the overture to the Bible. Maybe that's a better word than prologue. It's the lens to which you should see everything. Thank you, Linda.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's do two more here. Roberto asked, every generation of Christians has had to decide how much of the kingdom to trade away for safety inside the empire. How do you name that temptation clearly without making faithfulness sound impossible?
Okay, Roberto. I mean, in my own mind, I think of three layers. 3 layers of violence, 3 layers of nonviolent resistance. One's I'm going to call cerebral, for want of a better name. It's in your mind. I hear something being said. No, I will not accept that. Maybe I'll say nothing. Maybe I'm too scared to say nothing. But no, that is not right. It could be an accusation of sexism or racism or something like that. I leave it to your imagination. When I hear it, even if it's a joke, I would say to myself, at least to myself, that's not right. That shouldn't have been done. At least I will accept and recognize indecency, if not mendacity or anything else. Cerebral. The second one is rhetorical. To say something. Just to say something. If it's a joke, I mean, even slight embarrassment, could you just say, I don't think that's proper. I don't think that's right, even as funny. So rhetorical. The third one, could you do anything? So you're inching your way towards it. Could you do anything? Now, if we were talking to Jesus and Paul, we get no sympathy. They would say, we're taking on the Roman Empire, and at least you guys can vote. And at least they'll say you have a constitution that you can depend on if you can't depend on the New Testament or something. So I think from the beginning, immediately when you hear it, start resisting. I start resisting down all those steps. And if you can't do the second step or the third step or the fourth, because of whatever, at least do the first one. No, it is not true. It is not true. That's the way to begin, at least. Thank you, Roberto.
Yeah. All right. So we had a couple questions like this that we had emails, and then we got this one in the chat. And since you talked about Palm Sunday earlier, this one from John, I think it'd be a good one to kind of connect the dots of then to now. What do you think the world needs to hear on Palm Sunday as war rages in Iran?
Well, I am hearing it. I am hearing it, thank God, on the news. Let me put it simply. Northern Korea has an atomic bomb. We never attacked them, though they've been threatening us for a long time, and they could easily use it on the South. Why are we? What's the different thing there in the Middle East, in Iran? I accept completely, by the way, and it's fair enough to say it up front, that great people can have bad governments. That's true of America, that's true of Iran. I'm not saying anything to sympathize with the government of Iran. But at least could we hear clearly a justification, even from those who do it? Why Iran? Let me not talk about why war. Of all the options, why Iran? I don't want to, I'll put it bluntly, but why not North Korea? I mean, if we're worried with people who have the atomic bomb and who don't like us or threaten us or whatever, and who are not nice to their own people or anything you want, I cannot see. Well, I can see, of course, because Northern Korea doesn't have oil. That's all I can see. So, is there any justification for it? And I don't know if all the religions in this country were to say this is not a just war by any definition we've ever known. And what if we all, I'm talking about congregations, I'm not talking about isolated individuals. What if they decided to have a giant escrow account where X percentage of our money that goes into taxes should go into an escrow account? That's the only. Now, I'm not talking about individuals. I am not. You'll just be squashed like a bug. But what if a whole congregation or a whole, at least everyone who wanted to participate in a given religious community, everyone who wants to participate, we'll set it up legally because this is against our religion, not because we don't like war or something like that. It is against our religion to participate in an unjust war. Therefore, the only thing we can do is withhold our taxes in escrow, legally. That's the only thing I can do, because I'm afraid that once you accept, at the moment, each thing we accept, it gets bigger. So now we're in war in Iran, and that's accepted. Okay, that's just one country. It's just a country. It's an ancient country. It's not a group of terrorists in caves. This is a country. It's been around for thousands of years. So now it's all right to do this. Okay, then let's see what else is around. So I think we are being piped steadily into deeper and deeper horrors. And if you want, deeper and deeper sins. So at least, what does religion do? And I understand the rebuttal is then you lose your license. Then clergy lose their tax exemption. Parishes lose their tax exemption, right? We declare them schools of holiness, universities of holiness. I don't know how you stop the rally around the flag. I don't. Vietnam didn't do it to us. The second Iraqi war didn't do it to us. We're not learning. And so this, speaking personally, I don't think this is going to be over swiftly, because we're dealing with an ancient people. Now, maybe it'll be regime change. I'm not being prophetic. I'm just watching the trajectory of nonviolent resistance and the trajectory of violence. And this is escalated beyond anything I think that we have experienced.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Dom. And thank you, everybody who's been sending in questions and been a part of the class. And any of you that have joined any of the Q&As and want to get access to the lectures, you could head over to crossanclass.com. And hopefully in the next month or so, we're going to do a special episode with Dom and his organizing from Chicago co-author on their new book, where you have people that are on the ground trying to organize and enact a lot of the vision, thinking about the way in which Jesus and his own ministry and vision of the kingdom of God found traction, because we had plenty of questions like that. And Dom's like, well, I did write a book with someone who's figuring this out. So some of those we'll save and use for that conversation. But it's always a treat to get to do this with you, Dom. And This has been wonderful.
Thank you, everyone, and insist on having a happy and a healthy and a holy, a holy Easter, despite everything or against everything that happens to be going on. Thank you very much, Tripp.